Hello, Game 5, Nepo versus Carlsen, let's go. We had Ruy Lopez, again, for the third time they play with these colors, and all these moves were the same in all three games. We had b5, bishop b3, now castles, and in the first game white played h3, after which Magnus answered with knight a5. And as you know, maybe Nepo took, and we got some interesting position with a pawn down for black, but with a bishop pair. So in game 3, Nepo chose this, and Magnus answered with bishop b7. I think d3 was played and d6, and the game went on. In this game, Magnus chose rook b8. Now Nepo took on b5, takes, and now h3 again. He doesn't want to invite black to play Marshall with c3, d5. I think this was played against Duda and Carlsen from World Cup, when white took on e5 and went c6. But eventually white was even better, even pressing with exchange down for 2 pawns. But Nepo didn't want to test that. Maybe he's keeping this for some other game. He went for h3, trying to force black to somehow commit himself to playing d6, which he did. Because now d5 doesn't make any sense because of this and capturing, and usually in Marshall positions the pawn is not on h3, which makes it easier for white to defend. Because usually when black gets c6, bishop d6, queen h4, white is not able to get h3. So he plays g3, weakening light squares around the king, and that's kind of the compensation black has. So he plays d6, and now he plays c3. And now d5 doesn't make sense to play d5 in 2 moves, so black just continues with b4. Tries to open up the b file. Now Nepo plays d3. He could also play something like d4 to just challenge black's center, but after taking on c3 and taking on d4 and pushing d5, I think this was too committal for Nepo. For example, if white plays e5, then knight e4, and this knight on e4 is very good, so black's position would be more active than it was in the game. So here he tried first d3 to play calmly, and after taking, he went for d5 now. And now the difference is that after takes, if you take on e5 twice, now black has bishop e6, and it's not easy for white to develop, because the threat is knight c3. Capturing the bishop. And also something like bishop f6 is also very strong, targeting the c3 pawn. So he doesn't take, he just holds the center by knight d2, and now takes. Here Magnus scanned the position, and he saw that his knight on c6 is the worst piece. So he wants to get his knight from c6 to e7 and g6 by playing bishop d6, defending this pawn on e5 and getting his knight via e7 to g6. In this moment, knight on c6 is limited by this pawn. It's covering both b4 and d4 squares, and there's no future for this knight on c6. So he tries bishop d6, now queen c2. Also, it was interesting to go for knight c4, and after bishop e6 to go knight g5 to challenge this bishop on e6. If black takes, which is probably the forced answer, bishop c8 would be too passive. If bishop c4 takes, to just exchange some pieces. Also, a move like h6 is always natural, kicking this knight away and then going rook a8, bishop e3, and then just offering some trades. White is still slightly better because of the bishop pair, but black seems very solid in this position. But it was also very interesting to consider this. Instead he tries queen c2. Here, h6, stopping any knight g5 ideas. And now knight f1, because again, if white goes knight c4, bishop e6, and now you cannot capture because of bishop b3. And if rook a6, then just queen d7. And if queen a2, for example, to put some pressure on the knight on c6, then you can take, and go rook b6, neutralizing this rook. If bishop e3, then just take, and go knight e4. And now if bishop b5, now black has knight b8, a very nice defensive resource. And in case of queen b7, to attack the knight on e4, now c6. Now black gives up the pawn, but after a couple of more moves, the material gets so much reduced that it's not realistic for white to play for some advantage. Also, c3 pawn is kind of backwards, so it's all in margins of a draw. He tried here something else, knight f1, to get his knight either to e3 or g3. g3 is preferred because bishop has to go to e3. So knight e7 by black, and we get those knights on their optimal squares. Now bishop e3 was played by Nepo. Here it was interesting for white to go knight f5. And now it seems that if you take, white has a bishop pair, and also black loses the pawn on e5. But in this case there is a very nice move, knight e4. And the point is that after queen e4, rook takes b3 for black. White could also input some intermezzo like knight h6, and after g takes to go bishop d5. Because again, if you take on e4 with the rook, bishop f5, and if you take with the queen, then rook takes b3. So here, if black takes bishop d5, now the knight cannot go back to f6 because of queen g6. So eventually black would have to give up the piece back, but after king g7, it seems that black will hold this. After bishop takes, I think that f5 is also very decent, and it will lead to also quite balanced game. So Nepo plays in this position, he plays bishop e3. And after queen e8, trying to get bishop e6 without doubling the pawns. Now rook ed1, bishop e6, and bishop a4. Now if queen c8, bishop a7, now black has some nice resource in bishop h3. And taking on h3 is very dangerous because queen takes and knight f4, and the mayhem will be on the board. And also knight g4 is an idea, of course. If white takes on b8, there is bishop g2 as a resource, and if king takes, knight f4, king f1, queen takes queen h3, and now after king e1, rook b8. This position would be really unpleasant for white, but still very unclear what could happen in this position. With the rook down, but with great initiative for black. Look at this pieces around the white's king. They're all so focused on the white's kings that it doesn't matter that currently black is a rook down. And also at some point you might start pushing this pawn on the king side. So this position would be quite interesting if they played it. But they didn't play it. And also it wasn't forced to play bishop a7. For example, you can play king h2 or some other preventive move. He chose bishop d7, and now on bishop b3 I believe that he would just repeat moves with bishop e6, and he would be happy with the draw here. But now Nepo plays knight d2. Tries to get his knight to c4 and to target the bishop on d6. Now black took, queen takes, the queens got exchanged, and now rook a8. Magnus tries even more to simplify the position. Now Nepo takes over the a file by this. They exchange rooks, and now rook b8. So now white gets the a file, black gets the b file, and it's kind of balanced. But again, white is slightly pressing here. Now rook a6. improving the rook and also putting some pressure on this bishop on d6, so the pawn is fixed on c7. Now knight e8, trying to support both pawn and bishop, and anticipating probably some knight f5 in the future, targeting the d6. Now king gets into the center, knight f8. Now black wants to get to e6, knight f5 and knight e6 now. Now white goes knight c4, trying to hit on d6, and now black goes back to d8, trying to defend the bishop, and now f3, supporting the pawn, and now f6. It seems that black has to play something like h5 to stop white from playing h4, h5, fixing the kingside structure. But that's why white plays g4 here. Magnus hesitates in this position to play h5. He tries to set up some different kind of fortress, and he allows Nepo to go for h4, h5. King f7 and now h4. He wants to fix the pawns with h5 to make this pawn slightly weakened. Black just goes back to f8. King e2, now he tries to stop rook d3 or rook d1. Knight d6, black offers a trade of knights, which is always useful for him because he lacks some space. He took on d6, bishop d6 and now h5. The final part of his plan is to get his pawn to h5, so black cannot move his fixed pawns. Now black again goes to f8, rook a5 and now king e8. Rook d5, and now he doesn't want to exchange because this would just lead to favorable ending, because white would have 2 versus 1 on this side, and since the pawns are fixed on this side, it's practically not a majority because the knight on f5 and pawn on h5 are holding those pawns and make this 4 versus 3 majority pointless. So Magnus avoids the exchange by rook a8 and now rook d1, but now they repeat moves after rook a2, rook d2, and it just ends in a draw. If white tried here something like king d3, then black's king would also get active with king d7, and after king c4, king c6. And in case of rook b1, rook a8, he would cover all the entry squares, and this position also looks very fortressy. So that's it. Probably in somewhere around, I think around here, white had a chance to go for c4 immediately. And in case of bishop e6 to stop c5, now bishop a4. That was also a very critical moment in the game, because now c5 is very unpleasant to meet, and if knight d7 to stop this, now white can take queen d7, and after c5, queen c6. There's always bishop h6 to somehow ruin the pawn structure. If gh, then just rook a c1. And now the bishop is gonna hang with the slightly weakened pawn structure. And I think this would be slightly unpleasant for black, even more than in the game. In case of knight d7, then bishop e3 would be kinda okay, and if knight g6 to go for rook e1, and black would still have to find some good moves like queen e7, and on rook a5 to go knight c5. So that was maybe the biggest try that white could do in this game, but even with a small advantage, he didn't manage to capitalize on that because Magnus just defended so well. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed this recap, and I see you soon. Bye.